Welcome to the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. Glad we're here together with a good friend and a true man who's making an impact in the world, Nate Larkin. Nate is the director of Samson Society and author of this book called Samson and the Pirate Monks. And if you've not read this book, you have to get it. I encourage you to get several books that I've been reading, but this one is a must, and you'll find out why that is as we welcome Nate. Nate, thanks for coming back on our show again.
Oh, well, thanks for having me back. It's such a joy.
It is, man. It is a joy to be together. Last time you were on, you shared your testimony. We'll briefly touch on that again, just for those that didn't see that. If you didn't see it, I want to recommend they go back and watch that. The show of it talked about pastors and the struggle with pornography and and that was our. I don't think I've ever mentioned this on any of our shows before, but that was our highest viewed program we've ever done. I mean, off the charts higher.
Wow.
And so I thought that kind of speaks to this issue of men and women and the struggle with addictions, and particularly the sexual addiction, pornography. Do you mind just taking the short version?
Yeah, the short version of my story. Yeah. You know, just the church kid, the pastor's son, something you and I, have in common. Discovering pornography first in softcore form. When I was an adolescent. Saw my first Playboy magazine, felt that illicit thrill, followed by the avalanche of shame. Mm-hmm. The private determination not to look at it again, followed quite quickly by a second look, right? Yeah. A real common struggle, I think, for adolescent boys and increasingly adolescent girls, as the pornographers have targeted our daughters and sisters and wives. Yeah, but it took a much darker turn for me when I was exposed after I'd gotten married, after I saw hardcore pornography for the first time. And no longer was it still images. Now it was, peep shows back then, but the power of the moving image stimulates a part of the brain that just cannot distinguish between real experience and virtual experience. And it so happened, I think maybe we'll talk about this later, I don't know, but I think I was vulnerable to just the hook of porn addiction through, partly through personality, partly through family and church upbringing, certainly through trauma. The more we learn about addiction, the more we learn as we trace it back that it begins with trauma of some point, of some either abuse or neglect. And that was part of my story. But by the time I saw hardcore porn, I was in seminary. I was in a prestigious seminary on my way to ministry, determined to excel in the field. I had a lot of ambition. Yeah. And I knew that discovery, if I would, to be discovered was to die. I had to hide it. And I hid it very well, hid it very effectively. Never, I never became callous toward that sin. I struggled, I had terrible struggles of conscience and fought privately to overcome it, and tried all kinds of programs, spiritual and otherwise, to stop. But they were all solo efforts, and cried out to God a lot. Yeah. And I was quite concerned. I really actually believed that God, while he did love me, was also, to borrow a phrase from John Lynch, mildly disgusted with me. Right? Mm-hmm. I was a great disappointment to God. In the same way that I felt I was a disappointment to my earthly father. I'm not sure how much that all got mixed up. Yeah. But porn was a gateway drug for me, so softcore porn led to hardcore porn, and hardcore porn led, later on when I was a pastor, to cross. I crossed the flesh line, and innocently the first time, and then after that, quite deliberately began to pick up prostitutes.
Wow.
That was horrible living with that hypocrisy, and begging God for forgiveness, and begging for relief and release, that didn't come.
Yeah.
So I abandoned the ministry in the fear of being discovered. I only lasted 5 years as a pastor. Went into business, where, as I say, I had the great misfortune to succeed. So now I had money and didn't have to pick up women off the street anymore. I could be a little more careful, a little more discriminating. But it was all, I kept it hidden and told myself that really I wasn't hurting anybody. And because I didn't want to get emotionally involved with another woman, I love my wife. She's always been my best friend since, the day I met her. I told myself really that I wasn't being unfaithful. I was taking care of a physical need and relieving her of that responsibility.
Wow.
It was kind of like getting a haircut, except I needed an awful lot of haircuts.
Yikes.
Right?
Oh, my goodness. Jeez.
I rationalized, never completely successfully. I couldn't get away from the guilt, and here's the thing, I found myself just gradually going numb spiritually. I was unaware at the price my family was paying for my emotional absence.
Yeah.
Unaware of the degree to which my own self-hatred, my growing self-hatred, was now, leaking out into those around me. I was becoming thin-skinned and critical and distant. And other people were paying a price, but I wasn't aware of that. Anyway, wow. I'm just so grateful that eventually my wife discovered me.
That's a wild statement. I'm grateful she discovered me.
I am. And I'm grateful that first of all, I'm grateful that she didn't leave.
Yeah.
So grateful that she didn't leave. I'm also grateful that she didn't give me a pass and she didn't ignore it.
Yeah. So she had right tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't take responsibility for my recovery, but she made it clear that if our marriage was, she didn't just up and leave, but she didn't make a promise that she would always stay either. If we're going to salvage that relationship, something was going to have to change. And so I'm grateful that I finally was pushed out of my private search for a private solution to my private problem and went for help. And, God provided. So got sexually sober in 12-step recovery. And then really in a desire, first of all, to be able to integrate my faith very explicitly with recovery. By the time I got into recovery, I was spiritually almost comatose. I was still going through the motions. I was still going to church. I was still saying the words, but there was kind of this growing conviction that either God doesn't care or he doesn't exist. And recovery brought me to life again, spiritually.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to integrate my Christian faith. The Bible became a different book. And I also came to recognize that my addiction to pornography and illicit sex was not all that different from other addictions that other guys were fighting.
Okay.
I really do believe that all of us who can be described as addicts kind of share an inner architecture. And as I became more open with my story, I found that I was able to be of some help to people whose addiction was different than mine. And I could get help, for example, from going to an AA meeting and just sitting there and listening to drunks talk sense to each other.
Right.
So we wanted to start a Christian group that where we would not segregate by sin. That no matter what drove a guy to the room, he could bring his real self. He could say the real truth. And so, in 2004, we started the Samson Society, and that's the story.
Yeah. And you were kind enough to go in a lengthier description of that last time we met. So again, I hope people go back and check that out, and then come back to this too, because we're gonna go a little deeper here today.
Yeah.
And man, from what you just said there, my brain is bursting in like 10 different directions. I'm trying to be a good interviewer and figure out which is the best route to take. And I'm just going to go where my mind goes with this. Okay. So you and I both came from sort of a Pentecostal, maybe our grandparents' generation more so even legalistic a little bit, law-based, do this, performance-oriented.
Yes.
And then you and I think both became very grace-centered, grace-conscious, grace-aware, and the necessity of grace. Totally appreciate that. So thrilled we've discovered that.
Right.
Earlier today, just in the conversation, we were talking about scripture I was looking at this week, the goodness and severity of God.
Yeah.
As you were saying, you were going through that. So you quit you abandoned the ministry. You were in business, being very successful, but your Christian faith was diminishing. It was the severity part of God there. I just want to touch on that for a few minutes if we could. I know grace is where we want to center, but it's the severity for a minute. Is it possible that, like I was looking at Romans 1 and 2, and it talks about sexual sin. Yeah. And then you're sort of like given over to it. And then it's kind of 3 different times God says, I gave you over to. Yes. The first time is sexual sin. The second time it's a different type. It's more of the homosexual, men with men, women with women. Right. Third time it's a depraved mind. Right. Yeah. That thing you were talking about, the callousness. Yeah. Is that part of that or no? Is that just more of an internal sense of what you were going through? Or do you think you were actually getting to a place where God was saying, Nate, if you keep going this route, you could end up a seared conscience. You could end up. Yeah. I do think that I could have ended up in despair. I was drifting dangerously toward the rocks of despair when, just throw it all to the wind and nothing matters anymore. And one of my great joys these days is I do a newcomer meeting once a week. An online newcomer meeting. Nice. We have one every day, but I do the Saturday one. Okay. And so every week I get to talk with guys who have been guys who've been fighting this addiction, usually for years. Yeah. And what I see in their eyes, and what I hear in their voices over and over again, is a lot of despair, and then this desperate desire. Can you give me hope? Is there some hope? And for some guys, this is kind of like the last chance. If God doesn't meet me here, then I'm done. Yeah, I do think that, and I think sexual sin has a unique ability to carry us toward despair. And that that Romans trajectory, is that accurate in modern times in the sense of you kind of start off with, you called it soft porn, sexual sin, moving into things that are, maybe some people might call more intense or more. Is that a normal trajectory? Yeah, I think so, and I think it's also instructive to back up a little bit there in Romans 1 to see where that starts, because he says, because they did not honor God as God and were not thankful or grateful, God gave them over. Yeah. That was very, very instructive to me. I remember, I don't know if I've told this story, but early on in recovery, I remember one time the cravings were just intense. And I was in Nashville. I was a good 30 miles from home, and there were massage parlors and adult bookstores between me and home. And I just knew that my car was going to end up there. Yeah. I called my sponsor,
And I said, I don't know how I'm going to get home. I don't know what to do. I'm going to go do it. And he asked me whether I had a notebook. And I had one. And he said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to open up that notebook and I want you to fill a page, write small, fill a page with things you are thankful for, and then call me back. So I sat down and I said, he says, you got a lot of things to be thankful for. Yeah, life is very hard right now, right? Your business isn't doing well. You're running out of money. Your wife's angry with you. You're in recovery. You're trying to deal with the fact that you're an addict. But there's a lot of good things in your life. God's blessed you in a lot of ways. So write those and then call me back. So I was able to fill a page with things I was grateful for. I called him back. He said, how do you feel? I said, it's the strangest thing. I'm fine.
You hadn't mentioned that to me before.
Because lust says, I need something. I've got to have something.
Yeah.
Gratitude says, I have all I need. And so this, to me, a key spiritual principle is the principle of gratitude.
Yeah.
And when I drift from gratitude and I get into the gimmies and the wants, now I'm opening myself up to lust in all its forms, sexual and otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because it shed some light on heading things off at the pass. Getting rid of it before it gets too much in depth. And so you're talking about being thankful. Is a precursor to actually ever God saying to you, I'm going to give you over to that. So
right. Yeah.
That says a lot. And and I don't think I've ever heard that linked before, kind of recovery with, I've heard gratitude, be grateful for, I know in like AA or any, they say, the 3 G's, what you're grateful for, what you're good at. And I can't remember the third G, whatever it is. But I never heard Thanksgiving put in the context of helping you recover from lusts.
That long descent into depravity begins. First of all, when we don't honor God as God.
Yeah.
And that means, and I'm glad that you are, continuing to expand your own understanding of who God is, right? God in all of his righteousness, his kindness. So because they did not honor God as God, tried to take his place, and then they were not thankful, then began the long slide.
Yeah. And for you then, and others that you're ministering to, this if you don't get out of that slide, this depraved mind in society today, it's really like the confusion today. And I guess you're dealing with a lot of that. It's like, like men don't know they're men anymore. They're not sure if they're a man or a woman.
Right.
It seems like our whole cultural shift is in a direction that's probably somewhat confusing in some degrees, I imagine, for as you're ministering to a lot of these people. Are you seeing differences even in the last 10 years or so?
Oh, it's unbelievable. What I am noticing is, first of all, the newcomers are skewing younger every year.
Okay.
I used to think that you had to be 40 to hit the wall and want recovery. Now we've got guys in their 20s, desperate, who are so tied up and so imprisoned and so terrified that they're not ever going to be able to have not going to be able to attract a healthy mate, have a healthy relationship, enjoy healthy sexuality. Now that pornography is on the internet is accessible to anyone. The cultural consequences are, in my mind, absolutely catastrophic. So children are being exposed to depravity and it just long before their brains are fully formed, when they're trying to come to terms with their own identity and their own sexual identity. So there's a ton of gender confusion that's born out of pornography. The way women are coached, porn use among women is climbing at a staggering rate. Quite soon, porn use among men and women is going to be equal. I'm convinced. But women are being groomed by the porn industry. to devalue themselves. And it also throws into question their relationship toward men. And it's just, yeah.
Wow. And then, obviously your story is one that no matter how far down you go on this path that seems to be, we're using Romans a lot here today, that could lead off the cliff. Yeah. There's always that God story of rescuing, no matter how far into things you get. And lately I've been, I don't know, I get disturbed over where America's headed. So I think I picked it up a little bit from my father, the prophetic edge of, is it, can God, can he justify not bringing judgment on America the way we're going? And so I've kind of been not glasses half empty kind of guy lately, but more so very sober about the culture around us and the trajectory of our nation and the backsliding. But one of those great things, like in your story is part of this, and it's a long way around this. It was, so Jesus is crying out to Jerusalem, I would have gathered you, but you wouldn't come. Yeah. And so then he goes into the judgments of Matthew 28 and these, the wars and famines and earthquakes and all these, and then desolation, abomination, these things are going to come upon you. And it came about, AD 70, Jerusalem is totally destroyed, and there's these judgments of God. And I was kind of mulling over these things, and I just felt like this thought crossed in my mind. It's like, where was Pentecost? And I thought, it was Jerusalem. It's like, when was that? Like, well, quite a few days after Jesus had pronounced his judgments on. Yeah. I just thought, grace. It's like even a city that had been pronounced doom and gloom and judgment, God chooses that city to pour out his Spirit on. Yeah. And you could have been under the wrath of God because of your choosing to sin, but yet God has this great mercy and grace on you so that you can demonstrate his grace to other people. I think there's a question buried in there somewhere. Can you find it?
Well, I do think that even God's judgment is gracious.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think God loves us too much to allow us to go forever off,
I agree.
We talk a lot. It's common language in recovery of all time. You talk about hitting a wall, right? Or D-Day. It's the guys in Samson will talk about
D-Day.
My D-Day was, and they'll give you a date,
nice.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah, and it's the day where they had this hard confrontation with reality. It might have been the day they got served divorce papers. Might have been the day they got arrested. Might have been the day they lost their job. It was a day when judgment intersected with their behavior, and what was hidden became exposed, and they were facing consequences. Yeah. It seemed harsh at the time, and yet, almost to a man, our guys will also describe this great sense of relief that finally, I'm not getting away with it anymore. Finally, there's some judgment. Finally, and now I have the chance to turn it around. Yeah. I don't know what the ultimate consequences are going to be. Am I going to go to jail? Maybe. Yeah. Am I going to be divorced? Maybe. It depends on the circumstance. It is amazing to me how many marriages survive.
That's good.
Yeah. And not just survive, but thrive. Where guys say, what the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good, and we are much closer. Our relationship is far richer now than it ever was before I was exposed for what I was doing. But judgment, harsh as it was, has turned out to be a grace. And guys have paid, big price. I feel so fortunate that, I didn't lose a job. And I didn't lose a wife. Yeah. And I didn't face legal consequences. I didn't go to jail. There were times, during my years of blind acting out, I think it'd be irresponsible and insane for me to imagine that every female I was sexually intimate with was over 18. Especially in the early days. and yet I was never arrested. But I'm grateful. So I'm grateful that that the harsher consequences didn't hit me.
Yeah.
But I'm also grateful that judgment came.
Yeah. God knows the extent of the mercy required to draw us to Him. Because that's what He's after. Whatever it takes, the goodness or severity of God, and they're all one thing. They're wrapped up in the same blanket of His love for us. And so that's working in you.
The Gary Wilkerson Podcast is brought to you by World Challenge, transforming lives through the message and mission of Jesus Christ. Each week, this podcast reaches thousands of listeners. This critical work is made possible by the generous contributions of individuals like you who believe in World Challenge's mission. Thank you for listening and supporting